My name is Dominic Satanovich. I am a data privacy and cybersecurity partner at Wilson Elser. I assist our clients in data breach incident response, including law enforcement liaison and notifications. But we've got a fantastic panel here who are going to talk about anatomy of a ransomware, ranging from legal to law enforcement to forensic accounting. And so I'll give each of them the opportunity to introduce themselves, starting with David.
Thanks, Dominic. Again, my name is David McMillan. I'm a partner at Constangy Brooks Smith & Profit in the cybersecurity and data privacy group. Similar to Dominic, we serve as incident response counsel to clients in a wide range of data security incidents, overseeing forensic investigations, helping analyze notification obligations, regulatory requirements, and the like, and happy to be here.
Divine, I'm a forensic accountant, a senior vice president of forensic accounting at Lauer's Forensics International. I've concentrated my businesses on cyber breaches recently and fidelity losses. And I'm a Met fan from the Bronx. I'm very happy to be speaking here today, and hopefully we'll catch the game.
I'm Anna DeMarco. I'm with the Secret Service New York Field Office. I am the lab manager for the Regional Cyber Center out of our Brooklyn office. I've been with the service for a little over 20 years, doing digital forensics for the last 6 to 7 years.
So like I had said, our topic today is anatomy of a ransomware. So we're going to be talking about from discovery of the incident on. It's too late to be drafting your incident response plan and written information security program. We're talking about you've discovered the incident. So I'm going to tender to Dave the question is like, first hour from the incident, walk me through that. What's happening?
Well, after you've called your lawyer, who would be my first call. Now, I mean, in general, the approach is to get partners involved as soon as possible. So whether that's forensics, your insurance partners, your legal partners, there's a tendency with some clients to kind of take a wild west approach. If there's, a lot of concern about business operations, and that tends to be sort of the myopic focus. And sometimes clients are, wiping systems and rebuilding and installing new operating systems, and it results in the loss of some pretty critical forensic evidence sometimes that leaves us in a bit of a quagmire in terms of helping them analyze, the root point of compromise, the extent of data access, what was exfiltrated, and the like. So there needs to be a bit of a step-by-step methodical approach in your initial incident response strategies. A lot of times, from a legal perspective, we learn about incidents sometimes weeks, even months after something happened. And by that time, when we bring on a vendor to look at the forensic evidence and try to analyze what happened, there's just really no evidence left over. And it's very hard to piece together what happened. And a lot of times we're left in a situation where we just can't confirm the root point of compromise, which is sometimes not as big a deal, from my perspective, as figuring out what systems were accessed, what data might have been exfiltrated, because that's what really is going to determine the client's notification obligation. So bringing in partners to help at the earliest possible juncture, and realizing that these folks, these vendors, these legal firms are there to help. A lot of times there's a sense of resistance. Some clients think that counsel's just out there to churn fees and other things, and everybody's kind of asking them questions, and they feel like they're on the witness stand. So there needs to be a little bit more of an open-minded approach, and recognition that we're here to help and get them to the other side as quickly as possible, and help them fulfill all the required steps along the way.
Yeah, and speaking of partners, Anna, from the law enforcement perspective, when would you want to be brought in? How do you see the Secret Service's role?
So with the Secret Service, we prefer to be called as soon as possible. We'll send out an incident response team, acquire the image of your servers or your network drives, get that vital information as quickly as possible. Don't wait, don't delay. We don't want to disrupt your business. You don't want to be held off from being able to continue your daily operations. Let us go in, get the information, and work with your third party or your internal IT department. Work side by side with them. We have the initial raw image. We might be able to find things, see some trends or habits that are familiar to us, and point that out to your third party or to your internal IT department. So as quickly, as soon as possible. I'm not going to say not before the lawyer, but as quickly as possible.
And Dave, from the legal standpoint, what interests are you balancing when considering when to bring in law enforcement?
Yeah, I mean, there's different views on it. You know, I'm a big, obviously, proponent of law enforcement coordination and information sharing. You know, with the number of ransomware matters that my group and everybody else has had to deal with. Everybody in this room knows this is a rampant issue. You know, I see Secret Service, FBI, other law enforcement agencies as partners, and I'm a big fan of sharing as much information as early on as humanly possible, because they're actually the ones that go after the bad guys. But you know, if we're talking about the first hour of an incident or the first couple days, sometimes that tends to be a bit of a distraction at the beginning. So we like to get a foothold in the environment, make sure our forensic team is working as fast as they can to secure the environment, rolling out an EDR solution, preserving any affected systems, collecting artifacts, collecting logs, making sure everything is kind of calm and in order, and that we have a plan in place for next steps. And at the right time, whether that's the next day after an incident or perhaps a week or two in, then that might be an appropriate time to start sharing some information. There could be some exceptions if you have, for example, certain ransomware variants. If there's a possibility that there's a decryption key that's been located and found, and you have a contact in law enforcement, and you can get some information about that. So there are reasons that militate immediate communication and correspondence. Sometimes our clients get notified by CISA, FBI, other regulatory bodies, and they're obviously involved even before we are. So you have to balance it on a case-by-case basis. It kind of just depends. But I always push clients to be as cooperative as possible and give as much information as we can at the right time.
And on that same note, when it comes to gaining a foothold and figuring out everything that's going on, what are some examples of things not to do as far as clients who are pushing ahead and to get operational?
Just wiping everything and rebuilding, without having preserved system images or shutting systems down and losing anything that was in memory, not keeping logs in a separate secure location. Not maintaining air-gap backups, multi-layered backup solutions, all of the above. The critical piece is, what is going to be available for our forensics firms to be able to go in and diagnose what happened and contain the environment and help us give us the information that we need from a legal perspective to help them comply with any regulations or any notification obligations. So. It's really a matter of preserving the status quo when you first learn of an incident, and then coming up in a sort of step-by-step, thorough way for a recovery plan, instead of just trying to go at it on your own, which I see, unfortunately, all too often in a lot of cases.
And for Anna, you're chuckling. Most counsel, and we've all seen questionnaires from law enforcement regarding information and document requests. For your purposes, what's really important? What are y'all really looking for from our side in order to best help your investigation?
Just the initial acquisition of the image, or the acquisition image of the servers or the network drives. That helps us start. If you want us to have, speak to your legal team, we can speak to your legal team and make sure that we're all on the same page. We're not trying to disrupt anything or take over what your third party or your internal IT department's essentially trying to do and get you guys back up and running. So as far as documentation, I would say just a phone call initially and then work it from there.
Gotcha. And Dan, we'll loop you in as well. I'm sure quiet over there. From the business interruption standpoint, ransomware has obviously put people out of operation for a while. Tell us from your perspective, what are you looking for in terms of evidence preservation and detail to help you make your case?
I mean, normally we're not brought in during the initial stages of a ransomware attack because it's really the business really wants to get back up and running. They're not in the business of submitting insurance claims, so that we usually are on the back end of the loss. Usually, we're probably the last portion of the loss that gets settled. But at times, carriers, when there's significant losses in the tens of millions, they'll actually bring us in to try to do a projection on if the insured was going to be down 30 days, what would that cost them in dollars, because there's ransomwares out there that are 10, 20, even $30 million. And if the insured is going to be down for a full month and the loss is going to be 100 million, it's very easy for them to say, we should pay that ransomware. So, but in the initial stages, we're usually not involved because the systems are going to be compromised anyway. So they're not going to be able to access a lot of the financial data that we're going to need to value the business interruption loss and or extra expense. Additionally, when they do come up and running, it's not always, unlike the property losses, which are fires and tornadoes and things, it's a finite period of indemnity. And in cyber, it's not easily identified because there's not only the initial time that you're down, there's also potentially some reputational harm, which could be covered under a different portion of the cyber policy. Because if the customers find out that you've been breached, sometimes they'll break contracts, sometimes they just will not renew contracts. So it's up to us to peel back the onion to see when these, when notifications were sent out, and the correspondence between the insured and or their clients, to really value the loss. And like I said, there are different buckets. There's the initial BI loss, which is from the initial ransomware attack, and then potentially reputational harm. And also many carriers have an extended period of indemnity up to 180 days.
And to bring it back to that initial period where you're considering it's a ransomware, so threat actor negotiations. Now that we've assessed the available evidence, Dave, what are the risks of not communicating? Like what goes into deciding whether to reach out or not?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest pivot point, most people already know, if there's encryption in the environment and you don't have backups, that's sort of the main reason, certainly the main reason, in my opinion, ever to pay a ransom. And it's certainly a reason to at least reach out and start talking about what that looks like. But short of that, there are reasons that you might want to establish a line of communication with a threat actor, even if it's just for some sort of intelligence gathering purpose. If you're trying to collect information on what the claims of exfiltration are, for example, if you're trying to delay, the posting of any sensitive data on the dark web, for example. But it's music to my ears anytime I have a client that decides not to reach out to a threat actor and just tell them to go pound sand. And I am telling clients this more and more that we do have cases where folks decide not to reach out because they look at their environment, they look at the kind of industry they're in, they look at the kind of data that's in their environment, and they decide, we don't have anything that's that sensitive. We might have social security numbers for our employees, and we'll make them, we'll protect them by giving them the right services and notification and all that. But it's not worth talking about a ransom payment just for that. And I sort of try to push clients in that direction. But that's maybe a minority of cases. Probably in the majority of the cases, we do recommend some kind of reach out, like I said, to get some kind of proof or some kind of evidence to verify the claims of exfiltration or data access. The risk of reaching out, the risks of not reaching out are pretty apparent, and they kind of fall in a few different categories. You have the obvious risk of the data being posted and the damage that could cause to an organization. It depends on a lot of different factors. You know, there's been a lot of data breaches recently, a lot of ransomware matters, and a lot of data is being posted on the dark web. So if you are not a very visible company to the public sphere, maybe it's not that big a deal that, you know, your name is posted on a random threat actor leak site. Not to downplay any of that, but a lot of clients might end up there, and they might think that's not a reason at all to pay ransom. It's just everybody understands that this stuff happens. There's very few companies that haven't experienced this in one way or another. You know, but you know, this relates to your work probably in terms of valuing the damage to a business's reputation. You know, that's sort of outside my scope, but I know that can cause a lot of harm potentially to businesses depending on what you do. There's the obvious risk of individuals' personal information was, you know, out there in the dark web. Now you have social security numbers floating around. But again, we live in a world where most people's social security numbers have probably been breached at this point. So what's the value on that? There's obviously much less value on a social security number than somebody's medical records, for example. And there's other data that can be a lot more sensitive even than that. You know, you have other risks that are sort of less tangible. You have like what I call the headache factor of your company's on the dark web. Somebody's going to pick up on it and start asking questions about what happened and your response, and that creates a little bit of aggravation and drains your resources. So it kind of runs the gamut. But like I said, I always like when clients decide not to reach out or not to pay.
About everyone being a victim. I'm a victim of the Move It breach, so that's always fun. And as to the reputational risk of the data leak, Dan, how much does that inform your analysis?
Normally, that's usually the smaller part because the limits are a lot smaller and reputational, and they fit into very specific categories under the policy. I'm only there for the quantum, so I don't really interpret the policy. But usually, the reputational has to happen within, 2 months of the breach or 3 months, depending on what policy or what insured I'm working with.
Yes, sir. Just a quick question. Is there a way to deduce whether or not the plaintiffs bar and/or regulators are being more or less nice to people who chose not to pay a ransom? Or is there no way to delineate that in the case law that we see yet?
I mean, I don't know if there's any regulator that would start encouraging folks to make a ransom, if that's what you mean on that side of it, things.
And
I
so,
don't know
sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Specifically from the plaintiff's bar?
Either one, yeah. I mean, you chose not to pay the ransom because it was ultimately not the right thing to do, but as a result, you were, a wall of shaming on the dark web, whatever it stops, yeah.
Frankly, in my experience, I've seen less arguments like that and more just aggressiveness in terms of, regardless of how quickly you notify, they're still going to argue that you took too long. Even if you notify within 30 or 60 days, hey, you let my information sit out there for an abnormally long amount of time. And I'm like, that. If I notify you in 3 weeks, that seems like a pretty quick timeline to me. But
you answered my question in a roundabout way, because my question was really more along the lines of is a plaintiff's bar going to start getting people for just not paying because they were doxxed instead? But that just further advances that the easy habit or drug of paying the ransom hoping it goes away.
Right, and so with respect to litigation, my philosophy is if the argument can be made, it probably will be at some point. Just like, it's not a matter of whether it can be filed, it's whether you can get the suit dismissed. So my answer to that is I've not personally seen that, but now that it's out there and being recorded, someone might.
If I'm not a litigation attorney anymore, but if I was on the defense side and the plaintiff's counsel made an argument that my client is liable because I did not pay a ransom, I gladly handle that argument. I don't think that's one that flies. I think Dominic is right that the timing issue is really one that becomes more of an emphasis in a complaint.
No, absolutely. That's a great question. Any other questions? Up at the top.
Well, I didn't hear you comment on this, but to your last comment, it seems also has to come into play that you certainly wanted to ideally check with the Department of the Treasury before you made the ransom payment so you don't send people to jail.
Absolutely.
Just because you pay the ransomware and don't use the backups to shorten the downtime. I mean, even when you get the encryption key, you're still going to be down a certain period of time. So the business interruption is usually still going to be part of the loss.
Right, and when you're negotiating with criminals at this point. So for all kinds of reasons, you pay the ransom. There might be a 7-10 day delay before they respond and actually deliver the decryptor. There's no guarantee on that front. And but regardless, agreed. You have to do your OFAC checks and get your compliance in order before moving forward with any payment. And that's why, as part of the response, you need to make sure that your clients are aware. Hey, there's no guarantee that even if we do reach some sort of agreement with the threat actor in terms of an amount, we still have to go through our legal compliance, and we might find out that we're not able to make that payment, in which case, that's an unfortunate result, but we can't advise our clients break the law.
If I may, even if you do pay the ransom and they unencrypt your data and your information, you still risk them re-encrypting it and making you pay that ransom a second or third time. They can still hold your information hostage, especially if you don't have that backup system up and running to get you back, your business up and going. But we, as law enforcement, we strongly encourage you not to pay. Not to pay. You're dealing with possible funding terrorist organizations. And then what does that put your company at risk? You're funding a terrorist organization. So you would possibly be held liable for that. So it's kind of weighing your pros and cons. Talk to your lawyers.
Talk to your lawyer recommendations.
Are you aware of any instances where enforcement of that has gone forward? Any anti-sanction regulation has been enforced?
Oh, so he's asking, are we aware of any situations in which the sanctions list has been enforced?
Against someone who is in the facilitation line or ransom.
So if someone actually facilitates a Bitcoin transaction in a sanctioned entity?
I'm just asking if we're aware of any enforcement related to that.
I personally am not.
Now, I mean,
And well, if just real quick, even though I'm not aware of any enforcement actions against it, it's still the law, and I don't want my client to be the first.
That is a very good disclaimer. I agree. I was just curious.
yeah, I mean, sometimes that gets a little bit more complicated than you hope it might in the due diligence process. I'm not, an expert on this, but you need to identify who the ransomware variant is, and sometimes that requires our forensics partners to submit the IOCs and compare them to other IOCs that have been seen characteristic of a certain ransomware groups and have confidence that we are dealing with variant X or variant Y. Again, I'm not a super expert on that part of the process, but there is some gray area there that I understand it, and it requires a little bit more than just, hey, the ransom note says it was Klopp or whoever, and they're not on the sanctions list, or they are. So that's something to keep an eye out.
No, I agree with that completely. Very often, again, you are dealing with criminals, so you're taking some things at their word, but in the end, I've had clients who had critical data impacted, and only to find out from the payment facilitator that, hey, this particular wallet address is on a list, and we're not able to make a payment to it. We can't recommend a payment to that, and the insurance carrier definitely won't. So That's just an unfortunate scenario. Any other questions? I think, is 4:15 the time? Okay. Okay, perfect. I wanted to make sure. I got a question from John.
Yeah, my question is for our Secret Service representative here. And I guess this should also be for council, what sort of is the success rate of the factors that would impact the possibility of falling back a ransomware leak? Because it has happened, I've seen it happen, but what are sort of factors that go into the possibility?
So if we're notified within the timeline, 24 hours, and I think Victoria hit on it earlier on their panel, you're looking at a 60 to 80% success rate of return within 24 hours. But you have to make sure you notify the IOC3, and we'll get the ball rolling on it right away.
Even on a Bitcoin transaction? On a Bitcoin transaction?
So you're saying for ransom?
Yes.
Yes.
Right. We do have the ability to trace Bitcoin. It's actually open source. Anybody can trace where it's going. It's just like how quickly you report it and how quickly we can get to it.
So my question there is, as counsel, if you do claw it back before, obviously not before the decryptor is provided, but how often do y'all see where the decryptor is provided pre-Bitcoin leaving the wallet? And if it has left the wallet, what are odds of success there?
I know that I haven't personally worked a
Interactive panel.
I have not personally worked a ransomware case to be able to tell you, this is how quickly we get the decryption key. I know that it's very difficult to get decryption keys. It's very few and far between that you will actually see us get a decryption key in time to stop that ransomware. And even if so, I believe Anna already said it, like even if we do get the decryption key, who knows if they've already taken all of that data, right? We'll always err on the side of don't pay it. Do not pay it whatsoever, even if you're like, well, can't you get, I'm gonna tell you I'm gonna pay it, and then you just follow the money. Yeah, well, the difference with a regular bank and if it's Bitcoin or Ethereum or any type of crypto is once you make that initial transfer, that person, they're actively watching it. They will split it up 20 different ways. And then we're having to follow all of these different transfers. So it's going to take us a little bit longer to find out where all of your money goes. And even to that point, then we have to contact the exchange. And then hopefully that exchange is even in the United States. If they're not in the United States, then you pose a whole different can of worms, per se, that we're jumping into. Not to steal your thunder.
No, not at all. If you think about a spider web, they get the initial transaction, they move it to one account, and then they're going to split, like Victoria said, split it up to several different accounts. And then it's going to go again to other accounts, and then to other accounts. So the faster you reach out to us and get us involved, we can try to track as much as we can before it gets completely crazy. And if you all have seen a chart with all the little connections, it gets so convoluted, you get lost in the minutia of I'm chasing 500 Bitcoin here or two Bitcoin here. It would take a really long time.
But it would also probably take longer, and you would get, by the time that you get the decryption key, it would be too late to really get practically go through the process.
Depends on how quickly you get the decryption key and how fast they have moved that money.
What we're saying is involve law enforcement early. As far as you had mentioned, obviously don't make the payment. You have risks with trusting the threat actor, and they might come back and re-encrypt and all that. Like, as far as data suppression, threat actors often use the fruit of, hey, we'll delete your data. How often is that not the case? Like, how often are they deceiving our clients and will sell it anyway? Do you know?
I don't know, but I mean, again, you're dealing with criminals, right? So are you really going to trust them? Are you really going to trust them? Like, oh, well, they're not going to delete it, or if I just pay them, they'll give me my information back, and they'll never bother me again, and I'll put the backup up. Well, before you put the backup up, they may already have an exploit to get into your system. So that backup is old, and that exploit is still in there, correct? So do you think they're going to be able to get into your system again if you haven't mitigated that issue? So I still wouldn't trust them.
It sounds like you're listening to my client calls, and that's absurd.
Yeah, you always have to include, all of the necessary caveats when you're advising clients on this. The standard sort of theme is, well, these are some of these are rather robust, organizations. They're not just teenagers in their bedrooms anymore. They are, real organizations with HR departments and very robust security configurations and setups. So they have a reputation to uphold. If they don't uphold their end of the bargain, word's going to spread around and nobody's going to want to pay them. So you have that, but you also have, like you said, these are criminals, and we can never trust a criminal. I've never had, with one small exception that is currently going on now, I've never had a case where a payment was made and some proof was given in response. And proof in quotes. What that proof looks like can vary. It can be a video of them scrolling through and deleting, or it can be a deletion log or some kind of statement that they deleted your data, and the client just has to take that. There's nothing else they can really do to verify. And that unfortunately goes into the whole equation as to whether you are willing to make a ransom payment.
As far as the decryptor, I'm curious from the law enforcement standpoint, if we do get a decryptor, how helpful is a copy of that for helping future victims?
So with the IOC3, we keep track of as many threat actors' profiles, so we can assist those. So if you have a decryption key for one exploit, if we see that malware or ransomware come up again, and they've notified us, again, notify us, we'll be able to use that decryption key possibly to assist in helping that other person or that other company or that other business. That's where information sharing is extremely important especially in the ransomware topic. Like, help us help you help others.
I love that. Any other questions? I know we've got about 60 seconds. I got one up at the top.
You guys answered it earlier, but how often do decryption keys actually work after you think? And is it like the majority of the time, or is it like an exception with the decryption keys?
So the question is, how often do the decryption keys actually work? And I'll say the majority of the time, they work for some of the files. Might you need a second decryptor that they will also charge for? Certainly possible. But something will probably get decrypted. The percentage of the environment that will work on will vary, but I'll let everyone else chime in on that.
No, I completely agree. I mean, it's hit or miss. I'd say maybe the majority of the time you get something back. It takes a while. It's not easy. It's not just like pressing a button. And there's folks in this room who are way more experienced in the technical aspects of that than I am. But from a legal perspective, we're kind of watching. We're kind of seeing how does the decryption key work. Sometimes it's good news. Sometimes they're back up and running within a couple of days. Other times the process can linger for months and months and months to the point where they get to the point where they just can't do anything and they end up having to scrap it anyway. So it kind of runs the gamut on that.
I'm going to go with the standard digital forensic answer. It depends. Everyone has heard it. It depends.
Yeah. So absolutely, it depends, and also I just one client where the decryption key worked for some of the environment. They then paid a second time, and then the threat actor on the other side of the line just stopped communicating for a good 8 days after the payment was made, and then came back. It was last year, and they just were so apologetic in the delay because Russia had bombed their village, so they didn't have electricity or water, and then immediately provided that second decryptor, which ultimately decrypted 100% of the environment. So, long story short, the first one, some of the environment, but after 2 payments, we finally got the whole thing done. Good question. Any others? Any final comments before we close then?
Don't be afraid to reach out to the Secret Service. Don't be afraid if we come knocking at your door and we have been notified of an exploit and we're coming to you to just say, hey, we saw this, we received some information, we want to help you. Just keep that in mind. The Secret Service is here to help you as well as maintain the critical infrastructure of our financial institutions.
And protect the president.